Welcome to Full Spectrum, where I bring you unfiltered stories and actionable strategies from innovators who have done wild things, all designed for you to apply in your own life. I'm Molly Kawahara, and this is my podcast. Welcome back to Full Spectrum. I'm your host, Molly Kawahara. All right, I have something recently that happened to me that I was like, I just have to mention this. A couple days ago, I went to the gym. And do you ever leave somewhere and you just don't quite make it out to your car? You just kind of have to sit down again. I don't know. I was moving pretty slow. I ended up just sitting on these steps. And there was this whole scene going down because I think there was these parked cars, but there was a hit and run where a guy hit one of the parked cars. And so cops came and I think it was just an old person and they were confused. I don't know what happened. But anyway, there's a bit of a scene in the parking lot. And this woman was standing at the bottom of the steps, watching this. And I'm just on my phone, like an asshole, not paying attention to anything. And then she turns around to me and she says this: "If I saw you at night, I'd run." Immediately, I knew exactly what she was talking about. I think that line would catch a lot of people by surprise. I knew exactly what she meant. So I wear a lot of sun protective clothing. It's this is actually one of those. So these are sun hoodies. They're called UPF clothing. So that means it's intended to kind of mimic the same protection sunblock will give you, but it's through clothes. And we wear these a lot in climbing, especially on days where we're doing longer routes. You're going to be out all day. You're not going to be applying and reapplying sunscreens. You just wear a long sleeve hoodie, and you can put a hood on, right? And then I couple that with, I wear a baseball cap and sunglasses. And the reason I do this is because I didn't know anything about sun protection. Everyone else did. I didn't for some reason. I don't know. And so I never wore sunscreen through until my 20s. Never once. I climbed on glaciers, which reflect what? 80% UV. Never once wearing sunscreen. I would just get really tan, but it wasn't good. I was frying my skin, I learned. So then I kind of went in the extreme opposite direction. And so when I started wearing the sun protective clothing, I was sick, this is great. And so I just started wearing it every day. It became a uniform. It's not an attractive look. I mean, when I go to a wedding, I don't wear it, but pretty much any other time. And I just realized this is ultimate 30s energy, right? Where you just don't give a shit anymore. And I give off witness protection vibes. It's just the look, I guess. I don't know. And it looks scary, I guess, to some people. All right. Today, we're going to talk a lot about the nexus of tech and mental health. So over the last few years, I've been thinking about how popular these apps like Calm and Headspace have been, right? People are turning to their smartphones, these devices they're on anyway, that they have incredible access to, and they're using them to help have tools like meditation to improve their mental health or improve their sleep or improve their focus or whatever it is they're trying to do. And it made me wonder, if we're using these tools to cope with our mental health, then can we use tools like this to improve it? That question is at the heart of today's conversation with James Veraldi. James spent years building some of the biggest social media platforms in the world: YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat. If you've ever used any of those apps, you have used something he has helped build. And we know these are things that keep us glued to our screens in different ways, right? They are designed to do that. And we have seen more and more research coming out that says it appears to be a net negative on people's mental health. And in some research, a significant net negative. We're still quantifying how bad these impacts are, but we all know the impact social media can have on our mental health. I have kind of stopped using social media. I go on occasionally. I usually regret it when I do. The point is this: James faced a reckoning at one point in his career. Something really significant happened when he was at TikTok as head of product. He's going to talk about it. There was this incident and he stopped and he realized, I have been contributing to this massive problem. And what I really respect and admire is that on his journey, he realized that and acknowledged that, which takes quite a bit of confidence to do, right? So James walks away from one of the most powerful jobs in tech to try something way harder: building technology that could actually improve people's mental health. It is super easy right now. We have the formulas for how to build technology that hurts people's mental health. That is what social media platforms are, right? The algorithms that keep you addicted to scrolling and keep you inclined to open the app, and the colors and everything they're using. We know how to harm people's mental health through social media. How to use tech to improve it, that's a code we're still trying to crack. And that's what James set out to do. So he launches this mental health platform. And when it didn't create enough value for the users, he just shut it down and said, okay, what are we doing next? He's going to talk about 2 apps. These were the first iterations of this effort, which are Loop and Scenario. Ultimately, since this interview, neither of these apps exist anymore. They have morphed into a company called Kairos. That's the name of the app. And that ultimately focuses on the power of visualization, which we'll get into for athletes, right? So this is how to use visualization to up performance, because they were seeing this is where it was really helping people. So they zeroed in on that. This conversation isn't about those apps. It's about the story behind them, trying to figure out how to create tech to improve people's mental health as a tool. It's about knowing when to change direction, the power of visualization, which we'll talk about, an amazing tool, and how to redirect AI to use it more safely. And this is really important here because people are turning to AI in the millions for mental health support. I mean, the numbers are starting to get astounding, especially with young people, for how much they're turning to AI for both what they kind of consider therapy, quote unquote, and companionship. Large language models are the main things people are turning to right now. LLMs. These are things like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and more. And these tools are incredibly accessible to people, especially when you compare that to traditional therapy. These platforms for most people are either free or like $20 a month. So there's quite an appeal there. And in a lot of ways, these LLMs are helping people a lot. I can personally attest to the fact that I had a moment where I was really struggling and I needed help with emotional processing. And I realized I didn't really know how to emotionally process. For all this self-development and therapy I've done my whole life, I struggle with feeling my own feelings. Kind of embarrassing to admit, but it's true. And so I went to ChatGPT and I asked help me figure out how do you emotionally process? Give me the steps, help me through it. And it really helped me in that moment. I'm not advocating for the use of it. I am just saying personally, I get the appeal. But there's a big problem here, right? Which is that these tools were not expressly developed to provide mental health support for people. That means that even with deliberate prompting, which I have messed with that, they have significant safety risks. What happens when it goes wrong? It can go very wrong. And James and his team identified a lot of safety risks when people are turning to LLMs for support directly, which means I believe that if they're going to these in the millions at this stage, this early in the development of these AI tools, then it is more important than ever that we have innovators like James and his team who are figuring out how to provide safer tools for people. James has also been a leading voice speaking out against the risks of AI. He's been a very outspoken voice against AI companionship, which are platforms designed to replace human connections, real human connections, with virtual ones. So these are people who have a quote unquote AI girlfriend or AI best friend. And he's starting really important conversations around the economic impacts of AI and how we prepare as a society. So I edited this with the intention of a few pillars, right? One, lessons from an entrepreneur that I think can apply to anybody in any facet of life. A lot of this podcast is about cross-domain knowledge. What can I learn from an athlete, even though I don't do that sport? What can I learn from an entrepreneur, even though I don't work in mental health tech? I really believe in the power of cross-domain knowledge, which is why you hear from an array of people who do all sorts of unrelated things. If they're doing something cool, I'll interview them, right? And this is one of those. Two, the implications of AI being used in health tech today. That, I think, is a really important conversation. This is just the beginning of much more of that. And three, the power of visualization as a tool in and of itself. He's very frank about his lifelong struggle with loneliness and disconnection. So at one point, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. And he said, maybe this is what I was always working toward without knowing it. It is funny when we have those moments, right? We have those in life where we realize it all comes full circle. This conversation is about that. The thing you were unconsciously building toward all along, and what happens when you finally see it. Here's my conversation with James Veraldi.
My first job out of college was with Accenture, it's a management consulting firm. I was fired from that job because I sort of My client was General Motors, and we were doing marketing work for them. And what I didn't know at the time is management consultants really just create decks about things they don't know much about, and that's pretty much the job. And we were putting these recommendations for, pretty big marketing recommendations into this PowerPoint presentation for GM. Here I am, 22 years old, no marketing experience, and I was pushing back around, hey, I don't really know much about what I'm putting into this deck or understand why we're doing it. And I would like to do more research, and it didn't fit right with me. And I kept challenging my superior, who is the lead on the project, to take a step back and to have more discussions and to figure out why we're recommending certain things that not fly well. And I was just told, you're not a good fit here. And then I worked at Target Corporation. Similar thing. With Target, I was a buyer in cutlery, and I was finishing my work usually around 2 p.m., 3 p.m. each day, and then wanted to keep doing more work. So I would sort of do more work in areas that I wasn't asked to do. And, I think in big corporations, people need to respect the sort of lanes they're in. And I just was more reckless with that. And then I didn't take the feedback on that very well. I had no ability to manage difficult conversations or pushback, and I would just get defensive. And again, I was told, like, you know what, you're probably not a good fit here, and let go. And that was the moment I realized that it wasn't, I was sure entrepreneurship was right for me in that moment, but it was, what I was certain of is kind of slotting into a big corporation. I just wasn't maybe the best fit for me, and I needed to find something else. And so I found my way to LA and started working for a company called iFilm right after they got acquired by Viacom, and started to find my footing there, where they needed people to come in and just work around the clock and do lots of things and get their hands dirty and be available on call when needed, as needed. And I was really excited for that kind of life, and that nature of working. So that's sort of, I would say, the first inflection point for me was getting fired twice from bigger corporations and kind of moving into iFilm.
So what led you eventually to the work you're doing in the mental health tech space?
The genesis of Loop, which was the precursor to Scenario, was really when I was working at TikTok. And, so I was at Musical.ly before it became TikTok. I joined a few years after it started to lead product strategy there, and was the kind of driver of the personalization engine, which would become the For You feed, which would really become TikTok. And then the company sold as Musical.ly to ByteDance. And then in 2018, the summer, we rebranded to TikTok. While we were kind of right around the time we were transitioning from Musical.ly to TikTok from just like a branding standpoint, although again, it was the same app and same product, there was a 13-year-old young girl in Missouri who died from submitting a video to a challenge. So if you remember the early days of TikTok, these kind of viral challenges really drove a lot of the activity on the app. Not so much anymore. Now everyone is just in their purely personalized feeds because there's so much content. But back then, these challenges were kind of key. And this challenge in particular was sort of asking people to choke themselves to the point of asphyxiation and then come back. I mean, just ridiculous and not safe. But again, it wasn't the company that was putting this challenge out there, to be clear. It wasn't like TikTok's like, oh, here's a good idea. It's just purely user generated. But it's very unsafe as a core. Then of course, a 13-year-old girl who is trying to be popular and wants to do anything to be popular, which is part of the negative unintended consequences of social media, made a video doing this, and in the process of making that video, died. And it's horrifying. And I remember kind of looking around, and as a company, TikTok, there's not anything we're supposed to do necessarily. But for me, I started taking my head out of the sand on these negative unintended consequences of social media. I think we all who work, whether you're at TikTok, whether you're at Meta, whether you're at Twitter, whether you're at YouTube, you kind of have to put your head in the sand to just feel okay and not look around and just focus on, hey, the mission is to deliver entertainment, deliver content, to connect people. And these apps do fulfill those missions at times. And a lot of the unintended consequences are unintended. Facebook, TikTok in no way, Musically in no way set out to have a young woman pass away from a challenge. There's no part of that company that wants that to happen, but they happen because of the sort of cultural phenomenon that social media has created. And that just sort of, the way I kind of frame it as a Matrix reference is where I kind of unplugged from the Matrix and started recognizing like, whoa, I'm part of something that has all these unintended consequences, right? Of putting people in these endless pursuits of validation or disrupting our ability to critically think and focus and sending us down paths of misinformation and really kind of monetizing our anxiety and fears. And those things just started crystallizing for me. And I started talking about it more. It was hard to talk about internally because, of course, people are either in two boats. Like one, they understand and they agree, but they don't want to have to sort of confront themselves with these things. And it's a really hard things to go and fix when you're also trying to grow the app and compete with everybody else. Or two, people that don't care. And that's obviously like some subset of them. And those are the most challenging ones to interact with on these topics. Again, not the whole company. And I want to sort of pretend that these companies are all filled with bad people. There's always a couple of bad apples in the executive ranks in these places. And I was sort of told like, hey, you're creating too much noise around this. And for me, I just couldn't look away anymore. I had been part of, through Fullscreen, I was part of the YouTube sort of ecosystem, and then I worked at Snapchat and now at TikTok. And I just looked at it and say, wow, I've made a career and a living and a good living, and I find financial freedom for the first time in my life, all through this sort of social media world. And I just couldn't ignore those unintended consequences that were happening anymore. I couldn't just put my head back in the sand. And I just got to a place where I just needed to figure out a way to solve those things. And I tried to solve them internally. So I first tried to advance a lot of safety measures, everything from like warning labels in the app to time caps and limitations for people under 16. That did not get received well, as you can imagine. And was sort of more or less told like, hey, you kind of got to get in line or this is not the right place for you anymore. And I was living most of the time in Beijing in a hotel away from my dog, exhausted all the time. So the quality of life for me wasn't that great. I was stressed out all the time. My relationships were a complete mess in my real life and personal life. So it was time for me to pursue something else.
I'm curious, like, was there a turning point in that process when you just realized I need to be doing something different and it's going to be on my own?
Well, so the turning point was that young girl's death. And then months after that of me leaning into this more, advocating it more, and then sort of being told, you got to be quiet or you got to go. And ultimately then got to go. And for me, of all the different problems that, and again, it's not even just social media. I want to be clear. It's tech in general. Like when I think of the problem of loneliness and social disconnection, which is what I kind of want to center my next pursuit around, even food delivery apps contribute to this tremendously. I mean, how often do we find ourselves now, instead of going and having a meal with somebody or even just picking up food and talking to that local restaurateur or host or whoever that is and having an interaction, we just sit at home and press a button and have it given to us while we stay on Netflix or Fortnite or whatever we're doing at the moment. It's not just a social media problem that has contributed to loneliness and disconnection. It is a larger tech industry problem. And that is what stood out to me as like, I've dealt with this. I have been deeply lonely. I've had really a lot of interpersonal challenges in my life in all aspects, work, personal, family.
After years building some of the world's biggest social media platforms, James realizes he's been fueling the very problem he's battled himself, loneliness.
And this just felt like, okay, this is the problem I've had my whole life. I've realized I've contributed to this problem, again, unintentionally through the work I've done. And I have to now go try to find a solution. And let's find ways to tell the tech industry how we want to live our lives and to build for that. Because otherwise, they're just going to be continuing to build and optimize for efficiency and monetization, which is in part that's really the only responsibility they have. And to a degree, I get it. It's their fiduciary responsibility. That's kind of the system. The system we set up, a lot of people will get mad at capitalism and like this like broader topic. And it's not, it's the capitalist's job to monetize for their shareholders. It is the government's job then to provide a counterbalance and making sure they're optimizing for the people. and that there's always this push and pull between them. And that's how really capitalism works, is with that push and pull.
I want to come back to loneliness. I really appreciate that you brought this up, because there's tons of research that's coming out about how it can impact every aspect of our, not just mental health, but physical health as well. You took your personal experience and the pain you've gone through experiencing loneliness in order to harness that into the type of entrepreneurship you ended up pursuing. What was that process like, of like kind of evaluating your own story and experience in order to determine your work?
In one hand, it was easy because I could relate to it so personally, and it wasn't something where, oh, I learned of this problem and I had to go study it. Oh, this exists in other people than myself. So, and it just became so obvious that this is maybe what I was always working towards without knowing it. On the other hand, it's hard because you have to confront your own demons and your own challenges. And you have to do a lot of self-reflection. And so, there are kind of different aspects of it, but I would say overall, the decision was fairly easy because it was so personally relevant to me. Like trouble communicating, dealing with conflict and communicating effectively and not emotionally, like things like, that nature that I've always had difficulty with.
Determined to change course, he launches Loop, setting out to create a new kind of social media that aims to foster genuine connection.
A lot of us who work in social media for a long time and then want to build the antidote, so quote unquote, to it, believe we can build a healthy version of a social experience. It's kind of fool's gold. It's just, these things can always get out of the gate a little bit, but to scale and compete with, just the candy that is on, the big platforms, like you're not gonna, it doesn't really work. And I was, again, part of that group. Was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to build the healthy social media. And so the idea was kind of these social audio groups, up to 10 people max. So we would set the topics like imposter syndrome, social anxiety, being in a toxic relationship. You would just come in, your presence was an avatar. You were not on camera or anything. It was just audio. And they were chat rooms. We experimented also with having like facilitators or moderators in there, no moderators. We ran a lot of experiments over the course of that. And for the most part, these people were getting help from this and they got value from it. The conversations were staying on topic. Occasionally someone would take it down some path of just venting about a fight with a friend or whatever that was not relevant to the room topic. But for the most part, it maintained the mission. But it really stymied growth because, again, the rooms were capped. It was also hard to monetize because peer-to-peer support is inconsistent. So sometimes you get a really helpful room and sometimes you're like, what am I doing here? And it's hard to get people to pay for something that is inconsistently valuable. And anything that's like purely peer-to-peer and social, friction is sort of the enemy of growth.
It's a founder's worst nightmare. The mission is working, but the business model isn't. But just as hope fades, James spots a hidden pattern in the data.
Our most popular room was social anxiety, and during that first iteration of it. And social anxiety is this kind of growing challenge, especially for today's younger generation. And we also could see in search terms and TikTok trends, it's like it's growing, it's bubbling up, it's being talked about more and more. And so we decided, okay, how can we create a unique solution for people experiencing social anxiety? Not necessarily social anxiety disorder, which is a clinical condition, which I think should have clinical intervention, but more of a subclinical solution. And we just created an app still under the moniker of Loop, where people could essentially outline real life challenges they were having where social anxiety was getting in the way and set a goal to overcome it. The longer term vision of that was, could we create kind of like a Pokemon Go meets sort of mental health app where people are doing these real life challenges, these social challenges for themselves. But all the work was really outside of the app. And if you're socially anxious, just asking a socially anxious person to go and do something that they're anxious about now, that just because they've committed to doing it, but not giving them any other support or tools to really do so, is not really a recipe for success. And again, the app wasn't creating enough value in of itself for people. So it wasn't really engaging and retaining people, which is the holy grail of mental health tech. Is, retained engagement is the thing that nobody has cracked yet. So towards the end of that second chapter of Loop, we started experimenting with imaginary visualization. So if you put in the app a certain interaction, like I constantly fighting with my sister and I want to just confront her about it, or I want to figure out how to solve it with her. Let's imagine you having this interaction with your sister. Okay, what do you worry could go wrong? What is your real goal out of it? Kind of structuring it that way. And those tests led us to realizing there's a way to structure imaginary visualization in such a way that we could create this using the latest technology of AI with a lot of evidence-based techniques and data that our clinical team could design to work alongside it.
Imagery-based visualization is a powerful tool in psychology where you mentally rehearse a scenario before it actually happens, helping your brain live through an experience beforehand.
And that kind of was a light bulb moment of, okay, there's an opportunity here with imaginary visualization, which also has application well beyond social anxiety, improving performance, tackling stress, lots of things. With the recent advent of Gen AI, which really kind of changed the world of personalization and these language learning models, but it created a new technology where we could create hyper-personalized imaginary visualizations for people on demand. And that was the idea of like, okay, this is a different product.
What are the factors you're taking into account when you realize it's a moment to pivot in the startup space?
So I think it's first important to establish that there is no formula for knowing when to pivot versus stick with it. This is very case by case. I think people are always looking for some magic formula that they can just plug into their situation and it outputs the answer. That does not exist. It will never exist. There are a lot of nuances and contextual elements that you have to be factored in. And they range from what are we seeing from a data standpoint, first and foremost, talking to your users, what are they experiencing? Are they getting value from this? Why are they dropping off? Why are they not using it? Are we solving the problem we set out to? Are we not? Are we half solving it? You got to be talking to your users all the time. I think in my worst performing moments as a founder are the periods when I stopped talking to users for periods of time due to my own, issues going on outside of work or whatever it may be throughout this journey. The worst times when I stopped doing that. And so I think that's another factor. Talking to your team. What is their perspective? How is your team doing? Is your team even set up in a position where they can handle a pivot? From a stress standpoint, it's hard. Are we going to need to make any financial changes on compensation to navigate this? What is a timeline for, when we know the pivot's working or not? Are your investors on board with this? Do you think, will they support this pivot? Will you need to raise again after this? So there's just a lot of things you have to weigh in to figure out what that decision is. Sometimes it is right to pivot. Sometimes it is right to stick with what you're doing, but tweak the approach. Sometimes it's right to just shut down the company and move into something else.
Faced with those three choices, James chooses arguably the hardest one. In 2023, he permanently shuts the doors on Loop. But this end becomes a reset, and he immediately starts building his next venture, Scenario, a company focused entirely on harnessing the power of visualization.
We all do visualization. We just don't realize or call it that or do it productively. If you've ever rehearsed something that's coming up that, could be a job interview, a tough conversation with somebody, if you've kind of rehearsed that in your head, you're doing visualization. If you've ever replayed something that just happened, you're doing visualization. So me, like everybody, like you, Molly, have done visualization throughout our life. That's how our brains work. But I really didn't start doing it in a kind of productive way until really Scenario was out and I had a tool. Because me, I would like I think a lot of other people, when I'm experiencing something negatively, I typically visualize it negatively.
Isn't it wild how the things we create can circle back to us? James set out to build a tool that would change how others visualize their lives, only to realize it was the one he needed to change his own. In a way, he wasn't just the founder. He was patient zero.
I catastrophize. I do worst case scenario. I can't get different perspective. I'm not disciplined enough mentally to just visualize a different approach in my own head when I'm emotionally triggered and negatively emotionally triggered. Like I spiral. And I think a lot of people have that experience that. The first time I started using our app when it came out of beta was in early beta, was to figure out, to just practice the conversations I had with our investors. We had raised, a little bit of money 6 months prior to kind of get us to what essentially was November of last year. And that was just 6 weeks after we launched the beta. I needed more funding, obviously, to past November, now that this beta was out, to really start building it and getting it right. We kind of restructured the team. There's 5 of us. We were really running on all cylinders, and we were just been working great together. This new team was maybe 3 months old. But I had to go talk to my investors about, hey guys, I need more money again. And I had this conversation with them several times in this journey, kind of telling them that I needed more money, to trust me, that this new direction, this new thing, this new team, this new structure was going to work. And here's why, here's what we learned from the previous. And they've heard that from me before. As I said, we've gone through three significant iterations to get here. And so those were very difficult, nerve-wracking conversations, because I knew the pushback was going to come. Like, we've heard this before. Why is this different? And for me, the visualization wasn't to sort of tell me what to say or do. I knew that, but it was just to help me prepare mentally for the different ways that challenge might come back to me. You just type in whatever challenge you're having in your own words, and then it'll take you through a few questions to really break down, okay, who's involved in this? What's your goal? What's getting in the way? And I could even describe the sort of personality and nature of each different investor and sort of have that factor in, because, certain people will raise flags in different ways. It takes all that data and produces a recommended approach. Those approaches are actually designed by our clinical team. And what we've done is train the model how to retrieve them based on the context of your situation. And then you generate a visualization. It's like seeing yourself in a scene of a TV show. You can read it, you can listen to it. So the benefit to the user is, rather than having to create the visualization yourself, which very hard to do without someone there, we create it for you and then you get to consume it.
Here's what it can sound like in an example with a lemon from their new app, Cairo. It starts by setting you in the scene.
Imagine you're standing in your kitchen. Notice the counter space, cabinets, sink, and appliances. The only object on the counter is your cutting board. On it sits a single lemon.
It uses super strong sensory detail.
Pick up the lemon. Feel its weight. Run your fingers over it.
It goes on to visualize the smell and taste of the lemon in such detail that it actually makes the listener salivate, showing them just how effective visualization can be. What would negative or ineffective visualization look like that we're experiencing just on our own?
Catastrophizing is a great example. I think it's common, right? It's something you're worried about or stressed out about. You keep going back to the worst case scenario.
Catastrophizing. Like when a text ends with a period instead of an exclamation point, and you're trying to figure out why they're mad at you. Or when your boss schedules a quick check-in and you're suddenly updating your LinkedIn. And according to WebMD, that headache is definitely brain cancer.
Anxiety's job is to imagine the worst scenario. And without anxiety, we'd all be dead, right? We'd all just walk into oncoming traffic without anxiety. Anxiety is a good thing. We need anxiety to survive. It's when anxiety starts to overwhelm you and dominate your mindset in certain aspects of life is when it becomes, detrimental for you. And so it's important to always stress, you don't want no anxiety. You're going to walk down that dark alley in the middle of the night that you shouldn't if you have no anxiety. Anxiety is the reason you say, you know what, I'm going to go the long way around the buildings. So anxiety is good. It's just when anxiety overwhelms you, when it dominates and you have no other ability to see a different perspective than what anxiety is showing you, that's when, it can be very detrimental. It can lead to avoidance. It can lead to rumination. It can lead to stress. So it's just important to sort of mention that anxiety itself isn't the problem. It's sort of being overwhelmed by anxiety and only being able to see what anxiety is showing you. I do it in group settings. I'm very good one-on-one for the most part, but in group stuff, I just crumble. And I'm just the anxiety of all the things that could go wrong in this group thing, or, I'm going to want to leave and I can't get out and all this, when that's the only thing that's in my head and I'm not imagining anything other than what anxiety is giving me, that's when, I experience that purely negatively and I miss the opportunity to experience it in a different way.
It's interesting too. It's getting at this idea too of how many life experiences do we miss out on because we let anxiety dominate? I think of how many people I never met or new like activities I never tried. Like I always wanted to try like some sports or like join a running club. Like how many of those experiences I missed out on because I let anxiety take the front wheel. And what's cool is like you're basically saying that's not a required outcome. Like there is another way if you have the tools to manage that.
Exactly. And it shows up again, the way it dominates is different for everybody. So you might, Molly, be very comfortable in a job interview, but maybe uncomfortable advocating for a raise. And that's mostly because anxiety exists in both situations. But in the job interview, you already have the ability to imagine that going okay and well, not just purely bad. But then in that asking for a raise, all you imagine is the negative outcome. That means anxiety is sort of dominating that part. So the degree to which it dominates and overwhelms us is very situational and very different for different people. Now, there are people who it's in everything in life, and that's people you would say have social anxiety disorder, general anxiety disorder, or if where it shows up, it's so bad that it can lead to potentially dangerous, harmful activity for them, not just purely avoidance. And that's where you likely need some clinical intervention. Most of us experience sort of it subclinically, I would say, but still detrimental to us. Like an example, like there's a date you might just not go on, and it could have been the one, but you didn't go. And maybe you didn't go because you had a previous bad date that you don't know how to get out of dates well when they're going bad, right? So I would say the solution there is not avoiding dates. The solution there is visualizing and practicing getting out of dates that aren't going well. And I wouldn't just restrict it to these kind of big moments, these inflection points in our life. How many people have experienced where, let's say one evening or one morning, they get in some small fight with their partner, like not a big thing, or their significant other. And it's not a big thing, but it's not something they deal with well. They're now ruminating on it. They're cycling through it. They go to work, but their mind is still on this fight they had with their partner. They're not paying attention at work. They're missing something in a meeting. Maybe they're now combative with a colleague. These are the things where it shows up day to day for people. So it's not just like these big milestone moments, these inflection points where we have to like make a decision that could lead to a branch of something totally different. It's a lot of day-to-day stuff too, that visualization could be very helpful to just, again, break that rumination cycle. Okay, cool. Now I feel like I've processed that fight. I have a plan for how I want to like address it at home. Now I can just go and work.
It like clears your mind, right? Mm-hmm. The amount of cognitive load that's taken up by ruminating on one experience that happened earlier in the day or early in the week that we just like cannot let go of, that doesn't allow space for us to be creative or engage in a relationship or a social interaction or like see people or try something new. It can be really significant.
Yeah, exactly.
How much space that takes up.
Yeah, our brains are pattern machines. That's how they make sense of the world. That the only way our brains can process the enormous amounts of information that are coming through all of our senses and our receptors on a millisecond basis is through relying on patterns.
What James is getting at is one of the most fascinating frameworks within cognitive neuroscience. It's this idea that your brain isn't just reacting to the world, it's constantly forecasting what comes next, and often on a level we're not aware of. Let's do a quick experiment. I'll start a phrase, you notice what your mind fills in. Are you ready? Rock, paper. Your brain supplied scissors, didn't it? Right away. Salt and pepper, yes. Romeo and. What your brain just did by adding Juliet to the end of what I said, that's known as predictive processing. When I say knock knock, your brain instantly supplies who's there, regardless of whether or not I said it. It's the same reason you can understand someone talking in a loud bar, even if you don't catch every word, because your brain fills in the blanks using the rhythm, context, sound patterns it already expects. It feels like you're hearing, but half of it might actually be prediction. It's the reason you can walk through your living room in the dark, and it's why your whole body jolts when you misstep on a curb that's just an inch off, right? That's prediction error. But here's the crucial part. Your brain also predicts your habitual reaction to a situation. These shortcuts save energy, but it also locks us into our old patterns. And that's the crucial point here. If the brain defaults to predicting your habitual reaction, then changing your life requires changing your prediction. This is where visualization comes in.
The first step is kind of establishing, what do you even want out of this situation? And that is a really important step for a lot of people to take. Now, some people already know what they want, but some people don't. Or some people have a goal in mind that's not actually effective goal setting. So a good example is the raise example. If you set your goal as, I get the raise, that's not a good goal to set, because that involves somebody else that you have no control over, that counterpart, that boss, that manager, supervisor, who decides, the HR person, whoever it is. In that situation, you want the goal to be more, I want to be able to communicate my value. I want to be able to explain why I deserve a raise. That's the goal. So setting up the right goal is important. Then the visualization is not always seeing you fully achieve that goal. That's what we talked about. This sort of overly optimistic outcome is not always helpful, but sometimes it's just taking a step towards that goal. Like what it might visualize, and that asking for a raise example, is just you actually being able to advocate why you're valuable, and that boss merely saying, okay, I'm going to take it into consideration. And that's the end of the scene.
It's not you getting the raise, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's not the right goal, because again, you cannot control other people. And so your goal should not be based on behaviors that other people do. Your goal should be something that's totally in your control. What's in your control is the ability to advocate for why you deserve it.
It is so true that when we think about any like positive outcome, it often involves factors that aren't in our control. And so we can do everything we can to influence that, like work really hard to get the raise and have a good conversation around that. But whether or not you get the raise, of course, has factors outside of your control. So it makes sense oftentimes, I think in general too, to judge success based on your process rather than the actual outcome. And I think we mix those up a lot.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we often, if we don't get the outcome we want, we assume we did something wrong.
Yeah.
Or we assume it might just be the other person is a dick. Like that could just, a lot of times it is, you're just dealing with a difficult human being. But what's in your control is what you communicate and how you process it. And you're not always going to get someone to where you want them to be. You shouldn't set goals that are contingent on other people doing something prescriptive or exactly how you want them to do it. And it's oftentimes is giving them more agency, more confidence. They're actually telling it makes me feel like I'm in more control of these situations, regardless of the outcome. And that's the best case scenario for us. Like what I hope everybody comes away with this is feeling more agency in their life, saying and doing what is best for them, regardless of how the other person reacts.
So like, I know one of the places I experience a lot of anxiety is like any sort of like professional networking event or conference.
Yeah, they're the worst.
They're the worst. Like if I speak at a conference, people will come up and talk to me. And so it's much easier for me. But if I don't go, like I don't have an elevator pitch really. And so I've gotten feedback where people are like, no one knows what you do and you don't know what you do. And so when you share it, it's like really awkward for people. And I pretty much just like hang out by the food or I go to the bathroom for a long period. I have so much social anxiety before I go to something like that. In an example like that, how could I use visualization before having to go to an event like that in order to do better?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I totally resonate with that.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than just everybody coming out. So what do you do? It's such a brainless question. God forbid people actually get to know you as a person. And in the course of that, figure out what you do. So in terms of how you would use visualization there, it's a great example. Essentially what you would do is describe, maybe it's the start of a conversation that you have sort of jitters about. Maybe it's getting out of a conversation that you want out of once it starts. Whatever that is, maybe it's all the above and you can do them one at a time, but you just describe in as much detail as possible. The more detail you explain, the better experience you'll have around what are you having anxiety around. And you might have the thought process of, oh, this is awkward. I'm going to get awkward silence. Let's say awkward silence is what you just imagine you always encounter. So what the visualization will help you do is imagine different ways to handle awkward silence. Because like your brain might just say, run away. You know what I mean? Or just like awkward silence is the death bed of conversation. And now I just get paralyzed. And so you'll visualize yourself dealing with awkward silence in ways that you maybe didn't know possible. But the psychological impact is just being able to imagine something going slightly differently or very differently, could be a range, than what's in your own head.
Got it. So if you're imagining worst case scenario, you imagine how it could go well.
Yeah, or neutral. I think one of the things we hear from feedback we hear a lot is we've designed it through a lot of iteration to provide more neutral sort of outcomes. Because the language learning model, in our case, we're using OpenAI, but we also experiment constantly with Gemini and Anthropic and the different LLMs out there. They're all oriented towards trying to give you what you want and make you happy. And so they will sometimes create on their own a scenario that is just unrealistically good, and it's just like, it's almost condescendingly good. We've done a lot of tinkering to sort of find neutral ground where, the outcomes of a situation that's really hard for you is not unrealistically positive, but it's also not the catastrophizing version. It's somewhat neutral. It's somewhat realistic. That's when it's most effective.
So you're saying some of the AI large language models, because they're biased toward trying to make the user happy,
yes,
or be appealing to them, that like if I went through this scenario of social anxiety before this conference, it would be like, I meet somebody amazing. They changed my life with some insight. Exactly. We high five at the end. I walk out being that was life changing. That might not really motivate me to go because you just kind of dismiss that.
Yeah, it's like a Hallmark movie version of what would happen. Yeah, a lot of people tell us they were trying to use GPT for kind of role-playing situations, but it was always just telling them what they wanted to hear. And it didn't really feel that effective. And they found scenario, and all of a sudden it's just sort of much more realistic.
This is just one example of many. People are turning to AI tools like GPT for mental health because, in many ways, it works. It's available on demand, and it can offer surprisingly useful insights. But these tools were never designed to be therapists. They lack things like crucial guardrails and safety nets to handle things like a real human crisis. People will continue to turn to these AI tools for support, whether we're ready for it or not. Which is why I believe innovators like James are playing an increasingly crucial role in society, creating tools with the safety and structure people will need.
The more complex a task is for these LLMs, the more likely it's going to get it wrong or take it down. Like, it's to go through a problem all the way through a visualization. There's several steps along the way. There's several like safety things you want to flag. So we break it down into a lot of different steps, and we also fine tune them. And by that, I mean, we're providing our own data that it's referencing when performing some tasks. Now, we're using the same underlying foundational LLM as GPT. We're just putting a lot more different set of instructions and examples and protocols around it than what you're getting by just using it directly.
James has another world he inhabits as a technical diver, descending past recreational limits to over 150 feet or 45 meters deep, where light barely reaches and the world becomes a dark alien landscape. I'd love to transition into diving because it's a really cool thing you do, especially to the degree you do it. I'm curious, you have drawn parallels before between diving and your world as a startup founder. Can you share what some of those parallels are?
Preparation is everything. The reason you don't panic when you dive is because you should be prepared. The worst thing a diver can do is, and a lot of some reckless places around the world, tourism spots, will just put a tank on someone's back, give them a 10-minute overview of how to breathe through the regulator, make sure they can do that, make sure they can do something maybe super simple task-wise, and then, all right, let's go out and dive. That person is not prepared to dive. And if something does go wrong, they are going to panic because they're not prepared. You don't panic as if you're prepared. If you've practiced something going wrong, if you've stress tested it, if you understand the protocols and you make sure you can do those things, the worst case scenario stuff, you can do them if they were to come up, even though they're very unlikely. So when you get your PADI license, you do a lot of things that are super stressful. Getting my PADI license was miserable. It was a miserable experience. But it's because you're preparing for things like losing your oxygen, when you're down below, how to do an emergency ascension, losing your mask, and how to, make sure you can find it and put it back on and clear it in an orderly way. Because the worst thing you can do is panic. What panic does in diving, right? It affects your breathing. And the most important thing in diving is to constantly be breathing and to do it slowly. If you stop breathing or you start breathing fast, that's when really bad things happen, fatal things. And I think as a founder, similar things. Nobody should just jump into a startup because they romanticize it and think it's a cool idea. They should do a lot of preparation to really understand what the problem is you're trying to solve. Talk to people who are experiencing it, test things in lightweight ways before you raise money, before you go build a product, before you hire a team. Some people just jump into that. And, in some ways, like my own journey with Loop was I jumped too quickly into just fundraising and building a team. I had my experience to fall back on that I was able to do that. And I kind of wish going back, I would have stress tested my initial idea a little more before doing so. But I think preparation is the solution for not panicking. And I think that applies to both being a founder and definitely to diving in life in general. Like in our last diving trip, I had there was a leak because of my mask kind of slipped and I wasn't able to kind of fix it. And we were pretty deep down. So it just kept flooding. I had to keep clearing it. And it's, I'm prepared. I know how to clear the mask. It's annoying that I have to keep doing it and I can't quite set it back. All I knew is my mask was flooding constantly. And so I was prepared to know how to clear it. And had I panicked and just wanted to shoot up, right? Because I can't take this anymore. That's when you can have problems from shooting up too fast. And then I think even if you're having a tough conversation with a partner, right? Thinking through what do I want to say? What's important to me? What counterpoints might I get, and I want to make sure I don't get emotionally derailed by. So, preparation can show up in all different aspects of life.
Are there times as an entrepreneur where you've almost been tempted to panic, and working through that has been helpful for your outcomes?
Oh yeah, I think the one that shows up the most for any entrepreneur is when some competition shows up that all of a sudden is getting traction or got a new funding announcement. And, it's like, oh no, are they going to be better than us? Do we have to go copy what they're doing and slightly different than us? Are they getting better? And I have fallen victim to this. We all do. I think it's one of the most common things for entrepreneurs is kind of overreacting to some news or some traction or something good happening to a perceived competition, for sure. And, there's nothing wrong with it. Can be helpful to know what is happening in your sector and to know how a direct competitor is evolving their product or their offering or their messaging, and to run that process of analysis through that. But, ultimately matters is, are you creating value for them? It doesn't really matter what anybody else is doing. If you're creating value for your customers, then, you just need to continue to find ways to add more and find more. And if you're not creating all the value you need to find ways to create more value. All that really matters in the end of any business is, are you creating value for your customers? It's really simple. Are you creating enough value to justify, whatever it costs, not just money, but time, right? Is also a cost that they're inputting to you. Sometimes people only think of the cost of what I'm charging for a customer in terms of the monetary part, like what the subscription fee is or what the price of the product is, whatever it is. But there's also a cost of time, and you have to create enough value for them that factors in both the time and the monetary cost of what they're giving you.
That makes sense. So just keep the focus on your customers.
It's
creating value.
Relentlessly focus on your customers. And it's okay if you want to just for a moment look at what somebody else is doing, or if they're changing, cool, process it, boom, move back to your customers. Don't just stay over here just focusing on somebody else.
You can see the pattern here, right?
James has this uncanny survival skill. Every time he hits a roadblock that looks like failure, he reinvents. He once texted me saying they had 4 months of runway left, writing it could all be over by December. A few months later, I saw the announcement that the company had a new name and they were launching a new product. So I want to know, how does one choose to face that and adapt instead of quit?
How I manage failure. Well, I'll give you a two-part answer to that. One, I think that's an overused word. And I'll give you an example in entrepreneurship, right? It's used all the time when someone has to shut down their company, or, someone didn't have the outcome that they had imagined, whether it's selling or IPOing or that. We'll categorize that as failure. And we'll ask, okay, what did you learn from this failure? I don't think that's failure. I think what would be failure to me is if that person never tried in the first place, or if they tried and they didn't really try in earnest. They didn't push through some adversity. I've been an angel investor for 10 years, 30 plus companies, and several of them have had to shut down. That's the game. Like, most of them are not gonna work from a financial return standpoint. You know that when you're investing early stage startups. And I've always told the founders that in almost all cases, that founder gave it their all. They built a business. They had traction. They created value, I would say, for people. And they just, didn't quite get to a place where it could sustain or grow past a certain inflection point. But I never would look at that as failure. Mm-hmm. That person did something really brave, really hard, and they're going to be better for what they do next. Whether that's being a founder again, you're always going to be better the second time you do something. So they're always going to be a better founder the first time, or they're going to go back to a company that doesn't have entrepreneurial mindset. And now they're going to bring that to that company. They're going to sort of see things that a corporate citizen wouldn't see. So no matter what they do next, they're going to be better for what they experience. So I do think the word failure gets thrown around like too flippantly. And I'm also not going to go the opposite way of saying like, oh, nothing's failure. Again, to me, if you have an opportunity to pursue something and you don't do it and you wish you would have, then you've kind of failed yourself in not pursuing it, right? So like not trying something to me is more in the failure. But what I'll say is maybe I'll reframe the question as, what can you learn from setbacks? And maybe disappointment, or what can you learn from not reaching outcomes that you had hoped to reach for? And there's a lot you can learn from. The idea of doing a postmortem is always helpful in understanding, okay, what did I get wrong? Maybe I assumed something that I didn't test rigorously. Maybe I reacted too much to competition coming in, and I moved away from the path I was on because I was being too reactive. Maybe I didn't do a good job of bringing on the right people and assembling the right team or building the right culture. There's a lot of things that will, that something is driving the sort of the undesirable outcome that you have here. And I think there's always something to learn from it. And so it's really important to process why something went wrong, why something didn't go the way you wanted to, and really break it down in like granular detail, and not to do it in like an hour, but do it over weeks. If it's not something that should, the same amount of time you put into, let's use startup again, just because that's kind of some of the framework we've been talking about, you put into deciding to do a startup in the first place, which should be a lot of time and a lot of effort, should be the same amount of time you put into understanding it and analyzing it if you had to shut it down for yourself, and how to learn from it. So I think there's a lot that to be learned from setbacks and adversity. I'm okay struggling and having adversity, and I've had a lot of it in my life, and I'll probably have more again. It's coming back to my values as a person, and am I continuing to pursue them, and am I continuing to hold them true? And if I lost the way, a bit on how I got here, which happens too. Sometimes I do lose, like get off the path of those values. Can I get it back on? Oftentimes we only learn through adversity. We often don't learn much through success. We only learn through adversity. So if I can reframe that as setbacks or adversity rather than failure, I would say like there's learnings every time that happens in your life.
So as you guys know, my goal in this podcast is super simple, and it's to take the insights from our guests and to make them into actionable tools you can use in your own life. So this is a how-to segment. So usually in these how-tos, what I've been doing is I've been taking a concept either directly from or inspired by the conversation and giving you kind of a step-by-step strategy on how to deploy it in your own life. But as you heard in this conversation with James, there wasn't just one. There was a bunch of things, right? Reframes, rules of thumb, mindset shifts, the kind of things that can change how you see a situation or experience or give you a quick way to act differently in a moment. So instead of making you dig for those, I'm going to give you a super clear recap. Okay, one thing James said toward the end that really caught me was about his definition of failure. He doesn't see it as like things just didn't work out. That's just part of the deal, especially as an entrepreneur and a founder in his experience, right? Failure for him wasn't about I tried and something didn't work out. Failure, he defined as I wanted something and I didn't go for it, or I wanted something and I bailed before I actually gave it my all. Think about it. Pitching the client and not getting the contract, not really failure, but not applying because you're afraid they're going to say no. That's the one that'll stick with you. Same in life, right? Asking somebody out and getting turned down really stings, but you can move on from that. Always wondering if they would have said yes, that's the thing that keeps you up at night. It's a small shift in wording, but it can change where you focus, not on avoiding disappointment, right? That's part of the game, he says, but on avoiding regret. I thought that was interesting. So the reframe is this: failure is about effort, not results. 2, James has a super pragmatic relationship with anxiety, seeing it not as the villain, but as an essential thing that keeps us alive, essential to our survival. But when it takes over and you cannot picture different outcomes, that's when a reframe can be useful. So this is where visualization can be quite useful. And he aims for realistic or even neutral outcomes. So the reframe can be, anxiety can be useful. It can give us helpful information. We just don't want it to dominate your ability to think and move forward. All right, 3. One of my favorite operational things he shared was about postmortems. When something ends, James spends as much time breaking down why it didn't work as he did deciding to start. Think about how much preparation before we do anything big, a product launch, a career change, a new relationship. There's a lot of thought and energy that can go into that, adding equal value to determining what happened after. That information is gold for whatever is next. 4, are we on 4? Is it 5? 4, I think it's 4. James is big on preparing for obstacles in advance. This might echo what you might have heard in episodes 1 and 2 with Dr. Chan Hellman on the science of hope. When we talk about pathways thinking, this is a big part of that. Don't just not expect obstacles and like act surprised when they come. It's part of the deal. The setbacks will come. When you plan for that in advance, you can often overcome them much more efficiently. So he talks about doing the same thing as a founder. Map out the obstacles in advance so they become check marks, not roadblocks. Maybe, for example, rather than worry about the fact that you might run into your ex at a party, it's deciding ahead of time how you will manage that if it happens. So it's really a mindset shift here, right? Obstacles are not detours. They are part of the route. So when you're mapping out the route, you have to account for them. Okay, 5. James talks about the fact that when competition makes the next move, right? For him, product launch, funding announcement, he takes a beat, processes it, then goes straight back to asking, am I creating value for the people I serve? That's the metric, not whether someone else is louder that week. I think this is really valuable advice, like a how-to framework, right? You're going to pay attention, but you can get so obsessed. You can change your strategy. Look over, pay attention, and then come back. Am I creating value for the people I serve? All right, 6. James made a really important point about rumination. A lot of times we obsess about something that happened earlier, something we said that sounded dumb, something somebody said to us that bothered us. Rumination isn't about feeling bad. It's also about the mental bandwidth it eats up. One unresolved fight, one bad meeting can bleed into everything else we do. So processing it isn't just like healthy, it actually will free up space for what we need to do next. So that might mean sending the, hey, I'm sorry for what I said earlier text so you can actually focus on what you're doing that afternoon. Or having a 5-minute awkward conversation now so you're not stressing about it for the next 5 days. This, I will say, has been really big in my own life. Now, for people that aren't confrontational, this can be a really big mindset shift. It's easier to not carry these things, have them like pulling us back throughout the day. All right. The last one that really stuck with me was about values. This is something I really respected about James. It is really hard to recognize when we have been contributing to something bad in general. That takes extraordinary self-awareness, humility, and a ton of confidence too, I think. If we can work through that, then it gives us so much space to figure out what to do next. And a life that's aligned with our values is the greatest life we can have. I have so many shortcomings, so many moments all the time when I do not live up to my values or the person I want to be, the person I strive to be. We've all been there. Whether it's realizing my work is no longer aligned with my values. That is happening a lot right now, right? Either your values change or your work changes. The landscape is changing fast. A lot of people are going through moments like this, right? That's okay. Just let yourself be allowed to evaluate that. Or if it's in your own life, being like, I don't know, I'm the person who gossips in the group. Sometimes we have to realize we are the asshole in the situation. It is a really tough realization. But the people who have the self-awareness to spot it and course correct, that's something worth admiring. So I think the mindset shift here is alignment with your values is a moving target. You have to keep checking. Want more of the strategies we talk about here on Full Spectrum? I started a weekly newsletter called What I Wish I Knew, filled with all the tools and strategies I use in my own life. It also includes behind-the-scenes content, photos and visuals from the stories, and whatever else is on my mind. Sign up at mollykawahata.com/join, JOIN. Try it out. You can unsubscribe anytime. And if this episode made you think of someone, send it their way. 70% of podcast growth comes from word of mouth. So if you like Full Spectrum, anything you can do to help spread it to your community will be a massive help for us. And finally, I've got one ask for you. Hit the follow button and leave us a 5-star review. All right, there's more to come. There always is. I'll see you in the next episode.